It's no surprise to us that the podcast is growing at the rate it is.
That's Grace Andrews, the marketing mastermind behind Steven Bartlett and the Diary of a CEO, the fastest growing podcast in the world. In this episode, Grace reveals their social strategy that took the podcast from 6,000 subscribers to 4 million.
The podcast had 5,000 followers on YouTube. Steve sat me down and he went, the next 3 months of your life are going to be the craziest learning curve of your life. And he was right.
The behind the scenes secrets to DOAC success.
Every episode, there's like 20 thumbnails being tested.
100.
100 thumbnails being tested.
What most people get wrong about social media.
Do not belong on Instagram. And I will hang my neck on that line. Trust me, no one cares about it as much as you do.
And loads more.
And we've actually taken it a step further, and I don't think anyone's in the team, maybe even Steve hasn't spoken about this yet.
This is an absolute masterclass. I really hope you enjoy it. If you do, please subscribe and let's dive in.
So Grace, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. Let's start at the beginning. How do you start working for Steven Bartlett?
Always good to start at the beginning. So I was freelancing, and I think it's worth noting that I have no marketing qualifications either. I had just finished, as the pandemic was evolving or like coming about, I just finished a broadcast journalism master's degree because I thought I wanted to be a journalist. Like, I was sat on being 10 o'clock news, behind the desk, presenting, like that's all I wanted. Had to get this qualification ticked off. Anyway, that finishes up and there's no jobs. Like, the pandemic is in full swing. There's no way to get work experience. You need work experience to get into the industry. It's one of those like, who you know. And so I took matters into my own hands, and we'd actually studied as part of the degree social media journalism. And that was my first introduction to the world of social media from a like business perspective as opposed to a user perspective, because we're all users, right? And I came away and went, well, I'm going to have to make the most of this. Like, I'm back home in my childhood bedroom. I have no way into this industry. I'm going to force my way in, and I'm going to push those doors open so that when the world opens up again, I'm there, I'm primed, I'm ready. So I, on a whim, set up the Social Climber, which is kind of what I go by online. And I started creating my own educational content to mainly educate myself so that I could develop this authority to then start to educate others and attract kind of clients. I started picking up some freelance work. I mean, originally at the start, it was all free. So like totally pro bono, and I worked my way up and I like figured out socials. I figured out what worked. I figured out how to stay ahead, figured out the trends and the platforms. And like, I spent a lot of time learning, which is so important. Like, people just, we were laughing because, I probably shouldn't say we were laughing, but we put a job out for a social media manager, and anyone thinks they can do a social media manager role because they use social media. You need so much willingness to learn and like drive and passion. We can go into that. But I started freelancing. I was building up a good client base, and I was really, really enjoying it. Like, I loved the freedom and flexibility and the ownership, and I loved all my clients I was working with. And then this job post comes along. Steven Bartlett posts on LinkedIn, I'm looking for a social media manager. And I was like not looking for a role, which is always how it happens, right? It's when you're not looking, it's when you're like really enjoying what you're doing. And I thought, that's going to be kind of my fork in the road moment. And I could either kind of carry on what I'm doing, develop at the rate I'm going. It's going well, it's going fine. It'll be like a slow burner. Or I can skip ahead 10 years, learn from the absolute best in the industry. And so I applied on a whim, and it was like 3 bullet points, his job hiring process. And I half didn't expect anything from it, and half of me was like, I'm going to try and make this happen. So I contacted everyone in the team. Well, there was only one person in the team at the time. And I was like, hey, can I get some insight? How could I get in? And within 2 weeks, like, I'd started because I got in at the right time. And it's not a case of, there's obviously an element of luck and there's an element of right place, right time. But I'd also been working and grinding behind the scenes so that when this opportunity came up, I was actually like a very good qualified candidate, and I had the proof and I could demonstrate it. And I was willing to just kind of get stuck in, which, if you've ever worked in like small startup environment, like you do a bit of everything. And since then, coming up for 3 years ago, I've kind of evolved from social media manager, where the podcast had, less than 10,000 followers across the platforms, just me and the podcast producer, to marketing director position where I'm kind of leading a team of 5, 6, hiring a couple more at the moment. And it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's amazing when you actually sit on the other side of the fence, you realize the bar is so low when you're putting out job roles. So anyone who just comes across like they really want this and they like send those extra messages, all that other kind of stuff, you just stand out. And it's such an important thing, such an easy thing, but no one does it.
It also makes my life so much easier. Like if you can stand out to me and demonstrate to me why you're good, so I don't have to go through a lot of applications, saves me so much time. So in this, this role that we're hiring for at the moment, DOAC Social Media Manager, they're going to be responsible for the growth of the podcast on socials. The people that have stood out and the people I'm drawn to are the people who've reached out to me on my personal channels, connected with me on LinkedIn. They've gone above and beyond. They sent examples. They've sent case studies. They've done stuff I haven't asked because I see that spark. It gives me more than like a piece of paper or 3 bullet points can ever do. And they're the people I'm interviewing. Yeah. And I know there's kind of a lot to be said about, people don't have time and capacity to be doing all these extra like flamboyant things. But if you're sat on a role that you think genuinely has the power to change your life, like I'm not even being dramatic, put all your eggs in the basket, like go for it and just set yourself apart from the masses who are applying in the traditional way. And don't get me started on LinkedIn Easy Apply because there's no point. Yeah.
And it's like when you come to that Instagram page and someone's like, or built the digital CV, that's what I want. I don't want to look at your actual CV.
The best things are when people send me like a 2-minute video about them.
Yeah.
I'm like, done, got to know you on a way deeper level. I now feel more connected to you. And I feel like at least I owe you a reply. Yeah. Whereas when I'm getting a piece of paper, it's a little bit humanless. And I mean, I'm not, like we don't need to talk about recruitment on this because I'm not a top recruiter, but that's my method to the madness.
Yeah. I think it's worth just that we did just cover that though. But I'd love this to be like a masterclass in marketing, podcast marketing, social media. So maybe we start at those first few weeks. What do the social channels look like at that point? And then like, where are they today?
Sure. So when I started, Reels weren't a thing.
Yeah.
TikTok wasn't a thing. Posting videos to LinkedIn wasn't really a thing. So we're going back to like very text-based. And this is only 2.5, 3 years ago, which is crazy when you think about the evolution of these platforms. So I introduced short form content essentially to the strategy, which, as we all know, the boom of short form content across TikTok, across YouTube Shorts, across Instagram has been phenomenal in getting new eyes onto your content and getting that reach. And that was a huge turning point for us. But those first few weeks, Steve sat me down and he went, the next 3 months of your life are going to be the craziest learning curve of your life. And he was right. And I learned so much. I sat next to him, day in, day out. He's literally built the UK's leading social media agency at the time from the ground up. He knows everything about social media, which is really rare to have a boss who is better versed than you in social media. What I often have is people messaging saying, how do I convince, the stakeholders to get on board with this campaign or this creative? How do I extend my marketing budget? And I really have to sit back and go, I'm not the person to ask on that because I've always been lesser informed than the person I'm working for. Yeah. Or trying to stay ahead and be at their level, which has been a fantastic chasing opportunity.
Yeah. On day one, though, what are they at? Like YouTube's at like 10,000.
YouTube,
personally, he's got like on Instagram, what would he have?
When I joined, we already had a base of 1 million on Instagram. Big audiences, like already in the millions. So it's different to kind of the ball game I was playing before, which was small businesses, local businesses, thousands of followers, 10,000 followers. So the podcast I remember so clearly, had 10.2 thousand followers on the day I joined. And today we're heading maybe when this comes out to 4 million. And that's happened in the space of 2.5 years, really, maybe 2 years actually, by the time we really doubled down on the content. So yeah, the growth has been pretty remarkable.
And what do those first few weeks look like? Does he say, okay, give me a weekly schedule? there's this schedule already, we're already posting this kind of stuff? Like, what is it a blank canvas? And do you set goals? Do you start with a strategy? Like, this is my vision for it. Like, where do you start? And is that how you would recommend other people start?
I wouldn't recommend what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
But on day one, Steve sat me down and he goes, so when are you going to start posting? And you can imagine me, 1 million followers on Instagram, you know, a couple 100,000 on LinkedIn. And he goes, well, when are you going to start posting? And I'm like, what? Like, sure, I'm just going to click post, right? You're going to give me the content. And he was like, if you don't post, you don't learn. And it's so true. So that element of it has stayed with me all the way throughout. I tell my teams all the time, try it. If we don't try, we don't learn. Fail fast. That's our culture. However, there is, you know, merit to creating a social media strategy. The research, the execution, and the analysis, and that feedback loop is how you're going to kind of gain those, succeed on those incremental gains, and really kind of start to develop that growth strategy. So there's one thing to kind of post and execute and fail fast, but if you don't have that beginning, you know, a research process, and you don't have that end I can never say analysis, then you're not going to grow. You're going to kind of stay at that same level and actually probably start to kind of decrease in your growth because you're not growing.
So what's that first part, the research bit? And does that involve like setting, like, what's the purpose here? Like, what do we stand for? Or is that even a piece before that?
I think it's always important when you're going in with your social media strat or your podcast strat or whatever it is to understand what you want to achieve. Is it growth? Is it community establishment and nurturing? Is it new eyes? Is it new leads? Because it's going to dictate the type of content you're posting. So that stage is really critical, and it's really important to get everyone on board with that, because you might get down to, you know, demonstrating the content schedule, showing the content schedule, and they're going, well, that post isn't going to convert into any sales for us. And we're going, well, no, we just want to get new eyes. So it's a different strategy. So on that level, being super clear on what you're trying to achieve and creating a framework process to measure it at the other end, critical. But in terms of trying out and testing new things, I think there's like flexibility within that framework. And we don't believe in rigid, formally structured content pillars, which kind of goes against the general narrative of social media managers or people who work in social, because it doesn't give you that flexibility to kind of experiment and have that trust to kind of run with it without having to get sign off from stakeholders, which, you know, I've been lucky enough to have that trust from day one. So I wouldn't go down as, it depends on the size of your business and what you're trying to achieve. But I think at a top level, you need to know what you're trying to achieve. Is it growth? Is it new eyes? Is it conversions? And create your goals around kind of those metrics. And then you've got something to measure in 3 months. And that might evolve. 3 months in, you might go, okay, we've warmed up this audience now. We've got a product coming out. We've got a podcast episode coming out. We're ready to go into the conversion stage. Then your tactics change. Then your messaging changes. Then your tone of voice changes a little bit. So it's important at that level to know what you're going for.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about brands like RedBull. They help foster a feeling. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you see that for Diary of a CEO as well?
Of course, I think so. People buy from people, right? And the reason that, you know, this old adage, the old saying, is because people buy from connection and from feeling and from a place of vulnerability. If you're posting about your product online, trust me, no one cares about it as much as you do. How do you get them to care? You've got to show that feeling and emotion and build connection on that level that's beneath the surface, so that when you do release the products or you do bring anything out, people are there to buy because they're so eager and they're so desperate to get involved because they've built that established connection. And we're seeing more and more in socials that connection and that community piece is so pivotal and important. That warm-up process, that build up, that tease, that bringing the kind of user journey bringing the user on the journey and the build is so pivotal. And why I talk about RedBull is because their product is an energy drink. You go on their socials, you're not going to see a picture of an energy drink. I promise you, there won't be a single picture of an energy drink. There might be incorporated into an asset, someone drink it at some point because it's part of the brand, but there will be not one single product photo. Product photos do not belong on Instagram. And I will hang my neck on that line. Like, product photos do not belong on Instagram because people are not looking to be sold to. It's like a repellent to organic social media users. They don't want to see sales. They don't want to feel like they're being sold to, and they don't want to feel like they're consuming something that's an ad, which is why RedBull do it so well, because you go on their feed and they're creating a feeling, a community, a connection, which is what we need to achieve with our social media our social media organic channels. Because it's also really important to remember that social media is just one of your channels in your marketing mix, or it should be anyway. Maybe your place to sell if you have a podcast is through your email. So maybe you're building up your CRM database so that when the time comes to do a live show or sell a product associated with the podcast or expand the brand, you've got that database who have signed up, who are willing to be sold to. Your organic channels, in my opinion, are your opportunity for reach, and the content should be all about kind of reach, growth, connection, community, and they're the kind of areas you need to stick to. And I'll come back to RedBull. What they're creating on their feed is energy, and that's what their brand is about. That's their why. I talk about this a lot. Don't, publish your what, publish your why, because the why is what's going to draw the connection in. If you want to feel energized, I know that I'm going to go and look on RedBull. What's
the why for Steven?
The why for Steven and the why for DOAC is slightly different. But in terms of Diary of a CEO, we want to inspire, motivate, and engage with as many people as we possibly can on important topics. That's the basis of it. So for us, when you think about that, our content needs to reflect inspiring, educating, and engagement on a variety of different topics. We do have CEOs. We had CEO of Spotify on today, but we also have health experts who have, no social profile, and we have the biggest range of guests: actors, comedians, authors, all sorts. And I think that our goal in terms of marketing it, when all this change is happening, has to stay the same. So we have to keep that front of mind, that this is for the community. Without them, they don't exist. Without them, this doesn't exist. So we focus on them at the forefront of every single thing we do. Every clip, every post, even the long form episode itself, we're going, is this serving our audience? Is this catching the attention of someone who doesn't care?
Yeah.
If you unlock that, you're like into the magic.
Yeah. I think that's why yours works. Because if you look at it from like the what perspective, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, if you were starting a podcast and you spoke to a podcast kind of expert, they would say, pick a niche, stick to it, business, talk to the best entrepreneurs, sport, talk to the best sports people. And DOAC has like evolved, and it's been a journey. But like, if you were to say, speak to all these different people from different fields, you might think that doesn't make sense. But because you've got that why and like what you're trying to get from every conversation, and then demonstrate that for every piece of content you create, I think that's what makes it so special.
We want people to finish watching an episode, listening, leaving having gained something.
Yeah.
That's our mission. We get the most unbelievably motivating kind of letters and emails and DMs of people who say, this episode changed my life. And that's our why. Like that, we go, fuck, we need to double down and do this 10 times more, because these are real people and it's touching them in a really, really genuine way. And that's our reason. That's why we keep doing it.
Yeah. Let's get a bit more into the nitty gritty of the podcast and how marketing and social kind of shapes it. How involved are you with guests and topic selection and that kind of thing?
So at the start, we were doing everything from guest booking, trailer editing, before we had our pros on board, clip cutting, topic selection, title testing, all of that stuff. And as we've grown and evolved, we've established a team of experts. So we now have a podcast booking team, and a research team, and a production team, and a social team, a clips team, and it's a content generating machine. So there are experts in, I'm one member of the team, and there's experts in all of their different areas within the team. So, you're constantly learning from everyone, but it means we are able to scale and work at the speed we do. I think what's often confused is we'll speak to a kind of a smaller, more like startup level podcast, which we were at just a couple of years ago, so I can relate. And they go, oh, the Diary of a CEO are getting 10 clips out a day across all their channels. How can we possibly compete? And remember, we've got resource. Remember, it didn't start that way. We started with 1 clip a day, and then we built up sustainably with the resource we had available. So, the comparison game can be very damaging and detrimental. But it's also important to remember that we did start there as well. We started just figuring it out and just trying new things and just trying to market a podcast in a way that no one else was doing it.
Yeah. Let's talk through some of those kind of breakthrough bits in chunks. There's short form video.
Yeah.
How do you approach that?
Our short form video strategy is all focused around how we can reach new people and keep them engaged for as long as possible. We're actually not super interested in directing them to the long form piece of content. So we'll let them know where it is, but we're not selling, which I think is really important. We're not kind of pushing it down their throats that they need to go and see the long form, because actually short form is a visual art in itself that people are consuming more and more and more. Eventually they might talk about it offline and you might develop these warm leads that then turn into people who go and watch, but we're not pushing it down their throats. So in terms of how the process looks is we'll usually have someone sitting in on the recording. So we have a green room, someone's listening live, speed up the process, because then they can highlight the moments that we've come to learn perform best on our different channels. So we know that anything about sort of health, whether it's mental and physical, relationships, performs really well on Instagram. We know anything to do with work-life balance or careers or entrepreneurship bangs on LinkedIn. We know that on TikTok, the craziest things happen. So anything from a 10-minute clip we shared this week a 10-minute clip of Maisie Williams literally sobbing and breaking down in tears, and it's got 7 million views, to 2-second behind the scene moments. TikTok's our space where we do a lot of experimental stuff. So we'll get the long form piece, someone will sit in, they'll highlight those key moments. They'll then take that. Sometimes it's an editor, sometimes it's a social person. If they can't be live, they'll be watching the recording. They're marking down the moments. And then it will go to our kind of dedicated clips editors, of which we have 2. And sometimes we work with freelancers if there's a volume of them as well. And they will work religiously to make sure that those clips have the perfect story arc, the best hook possible, which might not be the start of the clip. You might be dragging the middle to the start so that you get those people in. Those first 3 seconds, as we all know, those first 1.5, 2 seconds are the most pivotal to your watch time. If you can get them in for that, you're probably going to hook them for 5, 10, 15, which means your content is going to get shown to more people. So that's why that's so important. And then to come back to your story arc, has it got a beginning, middle, and end? Is it serving a point? Do you finish the clip going, cool, I learned something, or that was interesting, or that felt complete? And I think that's really missing from a lot of people's content at the moment. They will see the podcast, slice it up, maybe using the kind of some of these AI tools, which I don't think are producing the best clips yet. And you'll kind of end up with a bit of a washy, unproduced point. So that's kind of the basic level. And we're also not set on every podcast episode must produce 10 clips. Some episodes will get 20 clips. Some episodes will get 2. But we're not going to compromise the standard to force them to happen. So I think it's also really important to have flexibility, because not every guest is perfect for every platform. And forcing and repurposing it straight into those other platforms is probably not going to be where the audience are going to, best receive it. So really think about your platforms, really think about that story arc and that 3-second hook. And then, short form has evolved so much in the last few years. How can you level it up? Can you bring graphics in? Can you bring sound in? Can you bring BTS moments in? Can you bring comedy in? What can you do to level up that clip to make it as engaging as possible? And we're testing stuff all the time, from the subtitle style. Are we doing dynamic subs? Are we doing colorful subs? Are we moving the hook from the middle to the start because actually that's more engaging? Are we trying 10-minute clips? Are we trying 10-second clips? We're just constantly trying new things because it's the only way we can learn what the sticking points are right now. And I say right now because they'll probably change in 3 months.
Yeah.
The platforms change, the trends change. So it's all about just constantly trying new things, analyzing, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't, and doing more of what did.
Yeah, that's gold. That's an absolute masterclass, because so many people, they think, I'll just stick my podcast into Opus or whatever the AI tool is. It will spit out some clips. I'll stick them in the schedule. Bob's your uncle, 100K followers, here I come.
I know.
And it's like, there's like levels to all of these games, right? And it's not to say that other approach isn't wrong as a starting point, 100%. But then to get your data. But then there are levels to the game.
And I think it's, what we've also started to do is create a short form first strategy, which is challenging when you're working with a long form piece. But what we're always looking for is kind of before the podcast starts and after the podcast starts, those moments, those behind the scenes moments, those intimate moments that no one gets to see, where you're off camera or it's happening kind of out of the podcast environment, perform unbelievably well. So it's also worth thinking, kind of, you've got this whole filming time. Can you use bloopers? Can you use the bits that aren't meant to go on camera? Can you use the bits that don't make the final edit because something happens and it's funny? That's a short form first strategy rather than working backwards from the long form.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see a turn in that moment. And that's why we're bringing someone on full time. It's going to start sounding like a hiring pitch. And we're bringing on someone full time to focus on a DOAC first social strategy. That isn't a case of just churning out what we've got as like a second thought. It needs to be a first thought, and it needs to be prioritized, because podcasts aren't organic growth platforms. You don't get external search views through like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You kind of do through YouTube, but not everyone's even filming their podcast still. So you need those external platforms to be driving views into those platforms. Those are your reach platforms, and they go hand in hand.
Let's talk about something that I think nails that, which is the trailers. How did they come to be?
Oh, I can't take any credit for the trailers. We have the most fantastic, I mean, you talk about goats, like the greatest of all time trailer editor, and shout out Anne. And essentially what it started being is we thought, okay, you have a show, you have a movie, you have a TV program. How did they promote it? There'll be a trailer, there'll be a sizzle, there'll be something that draws you in to tease the episode coming out. And we've always thought about doing things differently to how everyone else is doing them. So no one else was doing trailers. No one else was promoting really through social, because not many people in the UK were filming. We were one of the first, podcasts, shows to take the video side of it really seriously and not compromise and not use Zoom. So our standards have always stayed kind of here, and now we're going above and above and above. And we started with kind of, Jack would just produce a kind of short form version of the long form with the most hooky part at the start and some sort of cliffhanger. And that's what our model was. And then we brought in someone full time who at heart is a storyteller. He is a genius. If you ever kind of have the opportunity to engage with him, like 100% engage with him, he is the leading trailer, the best trailer editor that exists. He's come from, working in Disney and movies. So it brings another mindset and a different approach. And people won't notice, but every single trailer has a new experiment running in it. There's some sort of detail happening, some sort of things being turned or changed or amended or being trialed, so that they're constantly evolving and constantly getting better. And they've become synonymous with the brand. And what we think is amazing, but also quite funny, is seeing everyone creating DOAC style trailers as a result of it. It's become kind of like industry standard and industry leading in that way, which is just remarkable to us, because we never could have expected that. But it's just thinking from first principles. I'm going to sound like Steve here, but how do you get someone to watch something? And how do you get people to want more? Serve them a juicy hook, draw them in, and then leave them wanting more at the end. You can do it with a clip, but even better, mash up all the best bits and pop it together in a trailer. And it's just thinking about it from how do you get people involved? How do you get anyone to care? Position the problem, demonstrate that you're going to offer the solution, and then tease them in to come and watch more. And the amount of times I'll kind of be if I haven't, and I'll be totally honest, if I haven't been there for the podcast recording and it's maybe not a guest that I think, that's super up my street, I'll watch the trailer and I'm in. And that's how you make someone who doesn't care.
Yeah, they're genius. And like you say, they've created a whole kind of industry in themselves of like just copycats and all the rest of it. And no one can do it anywhere near the same level. So it's,
I mean,
incredible.
we're like, we need a second one and we can't find anyone who could do it.
Yeah.
It's such an art. And when I say, you know, everyone's trying to replicate what they see as the final product, no one is seeing what work is going into those.
Yeah.
The back and forth, the detail, the storyboarding, the planning, the iterations, the sound obsession, the, you know, taking out the audio and just listening purely to the audio for the moments that create that emotion. No one's seeing the work that goes in, so no one will be able to replicate it.
Yeah. I love this framework. It's from Alex Hormozi, and he tells his editor, I want you to put together a short form clip for me in an hour. And an hour goes by, he makes the clip. Alex then comes back and goes, yeah, that's good. What would it look like if I gave you a day? Then he comes back a day later and he shows him the next version of the clip. He's like, yeah, that looks pretty good now. How about if I give you a week? And you know, there's levels again to that game. If you spend, how long is he spending on these? Like a week or like days?
We now have, so it was just Ant, and we now have someone who's kind of doing the first section and then handing it over to him for the second section. So,
but that's 2 full-time people.
2 full-time people on the trailers.
Yeah.
You can't replicate it unless you're willing to resource at that level and commit and dedicate, which we were. We wanted to double down on this space so that we became industry leading, and that's kind of what's happened. But he could turn around one in, I think if he worked 24 hours a day, like 3 days.
Yeah.
But it's like it's a process. From the moment the podcast is recording, he's there manually taking notes of the moments. And, you know, he's learned a lot in the last year and a half about the moments that work and the moments that don't work as well. So you start to develop like an ear for it, and means you can get quicker and quicker. But he's amazing.
Yeah. It's so interesting you touched on the experimentation within every single one. Why is experimentation important, and what are some of the best experiments you've run, breakthroughs?
I mean, experimentation is the key to growth. If you're not experimenting on social platforms, you best believe you're going to be starting to decline in your reach and your growth and your performance, because the platforms are evolving, the audiences are evolving, and the content trends are evolving at the speed of light. So experimentation is the key to success in terms of a lot of marketing channels, but especially in organic socials. When I think about experiments that we've run, I mean, A/B testing podcast titles and thumbnails was the biggest eye-opener to us. I mean, when I say we're obsessed with experimentation, we've just hired a full-time experimentation manager who actually got taken from my team, which is very devastating because she's incredible. But I'm going to let her flourish in her new role, who is dedicated to executing and analysing experiments within every team to ensure we're always staying ahead and staying one step in front of the curve. Because as soon as you get complacent, you're done. As soon as you think, we're number one now, should we all just take a week off? It's why we don't do series. It's why we've never missed a week in the last 2.5 years. We will execute, even if all goes tits up, there is an episode going out Monday, 8 a.m., Thursday, 8 a.m., because we don't compromise on our standards. Some more experiments. A recent one actually is, how can we speed up the process of Steve feeding back the parts of the episode he found really compelling so that they can get featured in the trailer. We've actually, I mean, everything we do is a bit cowboy, but we've glued a trackpad to the underneath of the table. You might have seen him speak about this, so that when a moment comes up and it's connected to Jack's iPad, Steve will just tap and it will highlight in the transcript, because we're using AI to create the transcript live as it's going along, and it's sped up process unbelievably. So that feedback loop has, you know, shortened from hours to seconds, which means we've got more capacity to do other things. I think that's also why experimentation is so important. We're also strapped for time in this like fast-paced world. How can we find more time and give back time to different members of the team?
Yeah. And there's so much that you're saying now, which people just don't see. I've seen your Facebook ads library for the thumbnails. So just talk people through that. Every episode, there's like 20 thumbnails being tested.
100.
100 thumbnails being tested.
So, I mean, it's no secret. If you go look in the back end, you're going to see it all, and you may have been served them before. But so say episodes coming out on Thursday, a week before, we are running 100 thumbnails using 3 different facial expressions and iterating it kind of 3 times across those facial expressions. We'll then run them for a week up until kind of the day before to understand what is the most engaging title, what are people clicking through to. Also, it serves as a fantastic way to build up our subscriber base, because the call to action is to go to subscribe so that when the episode comes out, you're ready and waiting. And we'll look at all the data. We'll look at the click-through. We'll look at, CPC. We'll look at everything to understand what are the key points people want to talk about. And we've actually taken it a step further. And I don't think anyone's in the team, maybe even Steve hasn't spoken about this yet, but we are now doing a pre-research testing phase. So our researchers will establish the 20, 30 topics that they want Steve to talk about in the conversation. They're kind of the topics that no one else has spoken about before, the research they've uncovered and investigated. And we're now running those as thumbnails to understand the topics that people are more interested in and more inclined to talk about or get engaged with or get involved with, so that can dictate the conversation Steve leads with and also the assets we lead with in post-production. No one sees any of this unless you're looking.
Yeah.
But there's invisible stuff that we could be here for 10 hours and I couldn't talk about it all, because it's all of that kind of invisible stuff that's happening behind the scenes, which is why you're starting to see the compounding growth now. It's no surprise to us that the podcast is growing at the rate it is. Like it's 6 months, the work we put in 6 months ago, the work we put in a year ago is now kind of starting to be seen by the public. You know what they say about if you're losing weight, you notice it after a month, you're whatever after a month, and then everyone notices it after month 3. That's the same with what we're doing. It's invisibly happening behind the scenes. And what we're doing now is going to be representative of the growth that happens probably between like 5 and 10 million, because the next few months are dictated by what happened 6 months ago. You can't change that. You can only change what's going to kind of compound for you in the future.
Yeah. I think it's always good to be thinking, like almost hating what you're putting out now, because you know how good it's going to be in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, because you're already working on that stuff and putting in the systems and the processes that are going to like just 3 times it. I think the topic selection is quite interesting as well. I think Chris Willix does a great job of that. Like certain segments of his podcast are just like perfect for YouTube, and I'm sure he's like pre-planned them because he's got the title and the thumbnail already pre-programmed. Just on the titles, that's another thing you're a master at. It's you can have a podcast with someone that nobody's ever heard of and sell it. How do you do that? So do you test different stuff, and like what's the general approach there?
So we're testing before we do title tests as well as thumbnail tests. So we're title testing before, we're looking in the back end of YouTube and understanding what topics perform well. We're looking at kind of that author or industry expert and seeing what people are interested in their industry. And we're doing all of this research behind the scenes to find the keywords that are going to help the searchability, help the reach, and help the recommendation in the YouTube algorithm. Because once you're in the algorithm, you're set. So it's really, really about niching down and finding exactly what is going to, trigger those algorithmic shifts. And we're looking at all sorts of things from, Google Analytics to research in that specific community and how we can, and the real trick to a title, which I'm not actually directly involved in the process anymore, is really truly understanding what problem they can solve. And it's about making it broad enough so that people are interested and specific enough so that people feel like this is the one you've got to listen to. And it's an art, and we're all, figuring it out. But we have criteria that every title option of what we produce, 20 or 30, the producers produce 20 or 30 titles. We then have a spreadsheet of 4 pieces of criteria that every single one has to tick in order to pass into the testing process. Do you know what I mean? This sounds like absolutely ridiculous. It sounds so pedantic when you say it out loud, but it also makes me so proud that we're figuring out kind of the loopholes and the things that people aren't doing yet and setting the trends for what's to come.
Yeah, you're playing chess and everyone else is playing checkers.
Love that.
The YouTube is just like, the growth on that is crazy. Is there any lessons you can share there?
Are there any lessons? We're doing something interesting at the moment, which involves engaging with the target communities that we want this to reach, whether that's a demographic, a country, a community, prior to the episode, to get them engaged in order to share as soon as the podcast is released. So we're almost kind of working to build like a network per topic, per guest type, who would ordinarily share organically. But if we can speed up and reduce that gap between going live and them sharing, means that we get that first hour rush. And the first hour on YouTube is pivotal. The first 10 minutes are pivotal. The first hour is instrumental to the performance of the episode. Yeah, there's things that can come in later. Algorithm shifts, it can get recommended after a different podcast. But how can you hack the algorithm? You optimize for that first hour, which is why the audio goes live at 6. We don't promote the episode until 8 because 8 is when it goes live on YouTube. And the trailer and all the visual assets lend you to wanting to watch because it creates that kind of emotional connection, and it has become more of a show. You know, it's on BBC iPlayer, it's on international airlines, it's on all these devices because people watch it as much as they listen, actually, which is quite interesting. So in terms of YouTube, it's prioritizing that first hour, optimizing and testing your titles and your thumbnails. So you can run, there's loads of, I mean, you can now do it actually within YouTube, but TubeBuddy is what we used to use to live test your thumbnails to see what's performing best. You get results after like 48 hours, I think. So you can see if one is outperforming another, and you can optimize as you go. So it's not like everything has to happen before and then it's done and you put it out there and you go, you know, good luck, hope you go into the algorithm. It's all the things before, and then it's all the things in that first hour, those first 24 hours, those first 48 hours. And if I leave this, it's a Thursday morning, I'll go and check, and we have a podcast channel. We have multiple podcast channels on our Slack. There will be 10 people who've screenshot by the 10 minutes, the watch time, the view rate. Is it performing better? Is it performing worse? What can we do to change? What can we tweak? How can we get this performing the top in our last 10 if it's sitting at the bottom? What are some things we can change and experiment with and try and figure out to get it in front of the right audience? And the YouTube algorithm is really interesting, and there's some great explainer videos on YouTube that, you know, I won't do it justice, but it really is about matching up who they believe the video is intended for and who you want to reach with this audience, with this long form piece of content. And if you get that over, the closer you can get those dots to overlap, the more chance you're going to get sprung into the algorithm. And that means on the recommended side, which if you get in, you're off to the races, and at the end of other people's content. So there's some strategic things you can do, keywords, topics, making sure there's overlap, but there's also stuff that people aren't thinking about, physically putting your podcast in front of those audiences so that they're drawn in and you're overlapping.
Yeah, and I love the Top Boy recent one that like aligned perfectly with something happening, the AI one. Just quickly as well, paid on across your socials. Do you do much of that?
Yes, we were in-house and we're currently outsourcing it because we want paid. The best in the paid world tend to be freelancers and external because they get more budget to work with and they get more chance to explore and try new things. So we're currently using a fantastic external, and we do both paid testing and then paid promotion post episode. We also do paid for all sorts of experimentation. We use it as our kind of testing tool because it's controlled variables. Yeah. And
would you do that on YouTube? So say like to find that audience immediately, would you use paid?
Yeah. So we will upload the trailer and we'll upload a couple of clips into paid, and we are targeting specifically per guest the ideal audience that we're trying to achieve. So one that comes to mind that I think about all the time is Black Coffee. Is a South African DJ. His episode was kind of going like this. It was fine. It wasn't performing best. It was maybe like mid average. We pumped paid spend behind pushing it to a South African audience. Hockey sticks.
Yeah.
Because you've suddenly got in front of your target audience and you've been able to manipulate that slightly. And it's a controlled manipulation that's pushing the right people to the right place because it's not getting seen organically.
And there are you pushing the episode, or are you pushing like a separate clip, which is the trailer on YouTube?
We're pushing the trailer we're pushing the trailer as the asset and sometimes quotes, sometimes static quotes as well from the episode, because statics tend to perform quite well as well. We're trying new things all the time, but our trailer is our tease.
And that would be like from Instagram to YouTube or on YouTube?
Yeah, so at the moment we're only running paid on Meta and TikTok sometimes. So we haven't delved into like anything really Google or YouTube yet.
I think that's the other thing that anyone who's a podcaster or creator should think about is like, where does paid come in? Because like this is a crazy valuable tool. Like you say, it's the perfect testing environment, but like creators are out there and they're like just relying on organic stuff. You've spent hours and hours, invested loads of money in this piece of content, and then you're just like hoping for the best.
Yeah. And there's so much you can do on a low budget. There's so much if you're willing to think outside the box and not try and replicate, because as I've said, you can't see what's going into it. You can only see the finished product. So you're never going to replicate what's actually going into that. You can try some really cool things and experiment and get in front of new audiences and do some out of home stuff. Look at your other marketing channels. Like your marketing mix shouldn't just be organic social. It doesn't make any sense. How are you converting? Are you building a newsletter? Are you doing paid? Are you doing out of home? Are you all these other avenues and channels? Your strategy, when we talk about strategy, I don't love to like delve in too much into a social media strategy, but you do need to strategize your media mix.
Yeah, 100%. You guys do an amazing job of campaigns, and I think that's a little bit more your role now. The book launch is a cool recent one. How would you think about that kind of campaign?
The book launch was phenomenal. And also it's worth saying, we were prepping and planning that book launch for maybe 6 months. And we worked with a fantastic publishing house, leading in the country, who were able to kind of support with some aspects as well, which was different to last time. But the key thing with the book launch, yes, you saw the gold boxes. Yes, you saw the influencer gifting and the paid collaborations with the biggest book pages to get in front of the right audience, and the organic content and the competitions and the live event with Simon Sinek. They're all like top level stuff. Do you know what I mean? That's like the sprinkle on top, the magic, the stuff that's kind of going to get it round and get it going, get it to new audiences, get the reach. The stuff we've been doing for the last year and a half is preparing our audience, preparing our community so that when we drop something, they're at it like hawks. They want it, they need it. So it's not really like, yes, there's, ROI, like we've seen return on investment from those gold boxes, and the reach organically from those was phenomenal because of the strategic element of ensuring everyone had to post. We created we gamified the experience. How do you ensure that someone posts when they get 10 PR boxes a day? You say that they can't get in unless they have to post. And there's loads of things to play around with there, and not doing PR boxes that you see everyone else getting, because if everyone else is getting them, they don't care about yours. It's like what we started with, like standing up from the crowd, doing things differently. But really, and again, anyone can replicate the gold box. Anyone can replicate doing a live event on the day. Anyone can replicate giving away 33 gold books. You can't replicate the work you haven't seen us doing for the year and a half, warming up our audience so that they are primed and ready for this moment. The teasers, the everything we've done to make them feel connected and offered so much value for free in that time. Podcast is free to consume. Which kind of blows my mind, because it's an endless bit of knowledge. Any subject, any topic, you're getting an hour and a half, 2 hours of an in-depth mastermind from the leading experts in the country, internationally, the leading experts in the world. So we've offered all that for free. So we bring out a book for £10, you best believe they're ready and they're primed and they're ready to buy. And this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of, don't just, you can't just replicate a take to market launch that someone else has done because you haven't seen all the groundwork that's gone in behind the scenes for the year before that. If you're launching something next year, start now. Start warming up, start adding value to your audience in a way that no one else is, so that when you are ready to launch that product, when you're ready to do the live show, they're there in your hands. It sells out every time. We released, the DOAC Live in a year and a half ago when the audience was a quarter of the size. We sold out the London Palladium in 7 minutes. They call us and say, we've never sold out a show like that ever. Can we do another night? We're like, okay, we'll try our best. Sells out in 15 minutes. They're like, please, one more night. And then we're like, okay, that's it. Sells out in half an hour. Because we've created this desire and this like aspirational community where people understand their value they're getting for free. So imagine what you're going to get if you pay for it.
Yeah. The other type of campaign that you do is where you partner with brands. How do you think about that kind of process?
Brand partnerships are really interesting at the moment because we're seeing some brands and influencers, creators get it right and some get it so wrong. And the key to a successful brand partnership is creative control with the creator. Not just sign off, not turning up for a shoot and following the script. Ideation stage, whether it's the team or the creator themselves, creating the content, storyboarding, story arcing it. Because if you are not leading that, your audience will see right through. And the brand wants to engage with your community and they want your audience. That's what they're using you as a medium to reach a desired target audience, hopefully if they've kind of matched up properly. So you've got to let the creator have control. It's got better, but it blew my mind in the start that we would work with the biggest companies in the world. I'm not going to name drop anyone, name and shame, because we're still working with loads of them and the relationships got so much better. But they would, be so religious about the terms and the, how they wanted it to be without giving the freedom and the creative control to us who knew our audience. And it used to baffle me that these people and these companies were flogging huge volumes of their marketing budget into something that I knew when I hit send that wasn't going to convert. So why wouldn't you give the people who are running the brand and running the creative the ability to communicate with their audience that they do every day about your brand in a really organic and authentic way? And there's this general narrative right now that like influencer marketing is dying. It's rubbish. Actually, we're seeing a huge rise in the B2B influencer space, and especially with micro influencers who aren't full-time influencers. That's where you're seeing really interesting stuff happening. And, myself with 15,000 followers that I've kind of grown very slowly and intentionally slowly, so they're hyper engaged, are getting huge brands come to me because they want to reach 15,000 people. It's a huge amount of people who are highly engaged over someone who has 5 million followers, who shot up with a viral reel or a viral TikTok, a couple of viral, elements, and actually have a really dead and unengaged audience. So there's huge potential for brand collaborations and influencer marketing still, if they're willing to relinquish creative control to the creator and that they get the partnership right. You see it so many times where, they maybe someone down the hierarchical ladder or someone who doesn't really get the space finds these influencers and actually they're really like unmatched and it's not a great overlap. If you think about like as a Venn diagram with the influencer and the brand, you want that depending on what you're trying to achieve with the campaign, how big that overlap you want to be in terms of, is it acquiring new audience? Actually, is it speaking directly to their audience, etc. And the overlap is sometimes very, very minimal. And you are not going to get anywhere if your audience are not interested in the product you're trying to sell to them, because that is essentially what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And you guys nail that. I think when I look at the brands and the integrations you do, whether it be Whoop, Zoe, Huel, like Crafted, they all match and align perfectly. I think the other interesting dynamic is when you get to the size of Steven with the influence that he does, what is the bigger play here? Because I see he has equity in Huel, Zoe, some of these things. This isn't just a podcast anymore. This is just like a media platform that I can see sat on Netflix or I don't know where. Do you guys have like a vision for it? Some people, you see what Oprah built. There's like a lot of potential here.
We don't want to do what anyone else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't look at anyone. We don't look at everyone. A lot of people often say, we look up to DOAC. Who do you guys look up to? Because we don't look up to anyone in the podcast space because we don't want to do it like anyone else is doing it, because that's worked really well for us up to press. So we want to build this into the biggest media brand it possibly can be. There are lots of things going on behind the scenes, as you can imagine. We're really hot on distribution right now. So we're working with really cool brands to get it on their equipment, screens, in the sky. We want it on every airline possible. We've partnered with BBC iPlayer this year, which has seen incredible numbers for their platform. We want as many people to be able to access this as possible. Like that's our mission. So whatever we can do to get there is the plan. We don't We don't have an end goal. We love what we do. We're all hyper, if not slightly toxically passionate about what we do. And the reward is seeing, you know, people respond and people engage and people at live events and people coming up to you about it. And it's the most rewarding thing in the world. So we just want to make it as big as we possibly can.
Yeah. What's your relationship like with Steven?
You know, he's probably going to watch this, which is hysterical. It's good. Like, it's like working. We shouldn't, and we don't use the word, we're a family, but we work together a lot of hours of the day. We spend a lot of time together, and I have huge respect for him and everyone else in the team. And, you know, he works harder than anyone I've ever come across in my life, but it's hugely inspiring and hugely motivating. So I see it as I see my job as the greatest honor in the world.
Yeah. Do you ever fall out?
Do we fall out? We disagree on like loads of things. He'll share something, I'll share something. We exchange points of view. We both listen. We move on. We're in the same industry, so we're kind of on the same side a lot of the time. But he's so experienced in this space, and he's so knowledgeable that often for me it's a case of going, okay, here's what my thinking, but like I'd love to listen to why you're thinking about that, but never on a personal level.
Yeah, good. Let's talk about your socials, the social climber. How do you think about that? You're on LinkedIn and Instagram. Do you have like a vision for what you're doing? Do you have much of a plan behind it?
Originally, the social climber was my way to showcase to potential prospecting clients when I was doing my freelancing. And I loved it. The community I established, the people I've met. It's just incredible. You know, some people that are actually really good friends in real life now, which is so weird to me because it was really just a place to showcase and, as I said, generate leads. And then it evolved as I kind of got the full-time role to being more of a passion project, because you best believe there is no time in the day to be taking on kind of extra work as much as I would love to, as much as, you know, so many people message about it. I just don't have the time. I started, when I first started, I was still doing like little bits of consultancy, but my job is all consuming. I love it, but it's all consuming. So I very much kind of gave up all of that and just treated it as a platform for my own like experimentation and to keep myself educated, because that is the difference between someone who's going to be successful in this space and not, someone who's willing to stay ahead. I prioritize reading, learning, listening 30 minutes every morning to something in the industry, because one, it keeps me stimulated. Two, it means I will become an industry leader. And that's really important to me. So I think when I think about my why with the social climber now and what I'm building on LinkedIn is simply to establish myself as a kind of thought leader in this space and someone who people think of when they think of social media marketing. And they go, oh, I know a girl. Oh, I've seen her do some stuff. Oh, that's cool. She's kind of keeping us in the loop. And I just want to kind of keep people educated and up to speed, and people are so busy and I do it for fun. So why wouldn't I kind of share that as much as I possibly can? And it's a great space for me to keep up with new features, experiment with new features, try out stuff before we do it to millions of people. So yeah, I love it. And, you know, people talk about consistency and posting every day, and that's the only way you're going to grow. This lovely community has this like sustainable growth, and I post when suits me because I've set that standard from the start and they know that that's what they can expect. If I wanted to grow it, like if I wanted to scale it, I could, but I'm really enjoying the size that it's at, and it's creating some crazy opportunities.
Yeah. You do a great job of just speaking to one person. I notice it's almost like, you know, you're my bestie social media marketing expert, and you're just keeping me up to date with secrets, all the latest stuff. I would say as well, do you ever think about kind of, at the moment I want to hire a social media manager, you know, I'm thinking where would I get the best social media manager? Probably is through your Instagram or your LinkedIn. Do you think about kind of wider opportunities there?
I've hired 3 members of my social team through the social climber. So when I wasn't particularly looking for roles, people kind of came out of the woodwork and offered themselves up. And yeah, 4 hires recently have come through that. So it's a huge opportunity. I'm still thinking about some sort of referral scheme, but it's just time. And I often will post on behalf of different brands that I'm affiliated with. I do a lot of hiring for the Steve's Dragon's Den investment brand. So I will build out their social media teams, which is a whole element that I never even discuss anywhere. So I'll do a lot of recruitment through there. And it is essentially a community of social media marketers and small business owners who want to learn about social media. So it's a really, really great audience, a great space.
Yeah, if anyone didn't think it was a good idea to build a personal brand, it's just like a competitive advantage for life, because people you can hire people, you're seen as a leader, you can share your expertise. It's just like everyone should be doing it. Let's just very briefly, like when you're looking for the social media person or a marketing person, what are the kind of 2-3 things you're looking for?
I want to know that I don't really care necessarily about skills, but I want to know that they have a ridiculous passion and drive to learn. I want them to come to me and go, I am not the expert in paid, but I am going to do this, this, and this to make myself that expert. Or and what often really helps for me is if someone comes and goes, I've seen you're doing this. I think a really great way to do this would be to do it like this, because one, they've paid attention to what we're doing, they're tuned in, and they're trying to experiment already, which fits in with our values really nicely. So I'm looking for people who are willing to kind of get stuck in, get their hands dirty, show a willingness and an understanding of the industry, a willingness to stay ahead, that they're doing extra stuff, they're like attending webinars and they're reading stuff and they're sharing and talking about stuff. If they have a personal brand, even better. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. Like, skills we can teach, but I really need you to be driven and a nice person to work with, because we're going to spend a lot of time together.
Do you have a favorite task you set them?
I did a task recently actually for this role that has proven really successful. And what's really interesting is that most people came back with very similar concepts. And stylistically, everyone tries to kind of emulate the brand in their task. So they all have a really clear style to them, which was really interesting to see, because that's what we're obviously putting out and people are absorbing. And the task was, one element of it was to kind of give them a case study or give them a proposition or give them a concept and tell me what you do with it that no one else is doing. So I put them a guest, I put them a situation, kind of like scenario testing.
Yeah.
And I said, if budget, that there's no limit, tell me what you would do. How would you get as many people to watch this as possible? And you just get to see like their creative cogs whirring, and people come back with just like the craziest stuff. Of course, we're not going to do like 90% of it, but I love the way you're thinking, and it's limitless thinking, and it's, literally sky's the limit. So come on board.
That's brilliant. I'm going to use that. Let's wrap with just a couple of quick fire questions.
Yeah.
Kindest thing someone's ever done for you?
Oh my God, there's so much. Well, that's not a quick fire question. That's a deep question. Kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. I mean, so many people come to mind, but just when people are willing to help for no reason, I think that is just the kindest thing in the world. And so many people come to mind, both at work and in my family and at home. And and friends. I have the most unbelievably supportive network of people around me who have definitely helped me through the tough times in this role. So I have a lot to be grateful for.
Best advice you've ever received?
So again, so many people come to mind. You need to pre-warn me on these.
Sorry.
No, I'm joking. I think best advice I've ever received was Mo Gawdat, episode 1 on Diver CEO, keep it topical, who said that any time, and I live by this and I practice it, anytime you have a moment of like road rage, or a moment where someone really pisses you off or walks up to you and like does something totally unnecessary, is to literally out loud, and it happened to me yesterday because someone was very rude to me when we were driving. They put their window down and said something, and I just went in my head, you don't know what's happened in their day to make them be like that. Kill it with kindness, and to reset your mind so you don't waste time being angry or like upset or let it get to you in any way because it doesn't mean anything. Is just out loud say 3 things I'm grateful for. Immediately, I don't know the science, but it releases like the whatever it is, the happy hormones, the oxytocin that makes you forget about everything that's just happened. And it's been, I know it sounds super cringy, but if you literally go like, I'm so grateful to even have this car right now. I'm so grateful to be driving home to a cooked meal. And I'm so grateful to have had a day of work where I'm leaving so happy. You're not pissed off about the road rage anymore. Yeah. And it's changed my mindset.
That's genius. Top 2 books?
Shoe Dog, Phil Knight, Nike book, fantastic. And obviously Diary of a CEO 33 Laws. No,
but one for the role, maybe one for the role. Like, what's the
one for the role? I'm actually reading a fantastic book by my friend Daisy Hurd right now, all about community marketing. And there's not much in social media. Not much stuff makes it to print because it's so temporary. But this is kind of like solid foundations that will stand you the test of time in terms of nurturing and building and establishing a really successful community. But seriously, Diary of a CEO 33 Laws.
Okay, yeah.
Is actually
I've heard some good reviews already.
It's everything you could need to know in a position of marketing or leadership.
Yeah. Who are the 2-3 creators that you follow that you really admire?
I'm really inspired by Sophie from Pretty Little Marketer. She is building an incredible a community of marketers. Her content is fantastic. And she's super, super lovely as well. And just oozes with inspiration. Every time I look at her content, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? And then who else am I really inspired by? There are so many. I'm really into like fashion creators at the moment, and I'm not gonna be able to name this guy's name, but people who do like really like leveling up their content like I've never seen before. I mean, like, I love your like Alex Hormozis and like all the people who've been on the podcast, but I'm like trying not to mention any of those.
Yeah.
I mean,
the aesthetic stuff though is good, isn't it?
And like people who just get like transitions and you are mesmerized and you can't stop watching. There's one guy in particular, I'll have to send it to you later. But also Alex Cooper, Call Her Daddy.
Yeah.
What they're doing with podcasting and the Unwell Network is fascinating, and I'm keeping a very close eye.
Yeah, smart cookie.
Yeah.
Lastly, where can people find you?
I'm Grace Andrews on LinkedIn. I'm at the.socialclimber on Instagram. Yeah, hopefully that's enough.
Awesome, amazing. Thank you so much. There's so much value in there. I'm like buzzing. I'm can't wait to listen to it again and then implement it all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing it.